coalition powerhouse. Come on down to the front if you're joining the network and coalition one. Yeah. There's a couple of spaces down here. Yeah. Okay. We're good. Do you want to come on over? Because I don't think you're going to see very well over there. You want to come over into the middle a bit. Right. We're trying to make this very big space a bit more cozy. Okay, yeah. Come into the middle. That's great. Okay. Yeah. We're messing it all up for the videographers. We like to do our best on that. Okay. Fabulous. Yeah, there's a couple of spaces down here. Come on down. Yeah. Okay. So welcome to our session this afternoon on networks and coalitions. So we are delighted to have you here. If you're joining the networks and coalitions one, come and try and sit in the middle area here. We want to be cozy. So come find some space in the middle. Great. Okay. So we are going to start off with introducing ourselves. So now we're going to introduce ourselves not in the terms of like who we're working for and stuff, but we're each of us going to introduce ourselves as to why, who we are and what coalition did we either start or be a part of, and why? Dalaina, you first.
There we go. Hi, everyone. My name is Dalaina May, and I am the founder of the Dark Bali Indonesia Coalition. We started with 4 organizations in Bali, and now we're national with, I don't even know, you'd have to ask Asti for the real list because it changes every day, but somewhere near 100 now across the country.
Hello, my name's Leanne Rhodes. So I led the European Freedom Network, which is a network of about 270 faith-based anti-trafficking organizations.
Hi, I'm Helen. I am leading the coalition for Asia Freedom Network. Also Connect Thailand for Thailand, co-leading that, and putting together the coalition for the Asia Region Survivor Network.
Overachiever.
Yeah, just slight overachiever. And I'm Helen, and I started the Chabdai coalition back in 2005. So we were chatting a little bit earlier, and we said, you know, what is it about why we do this crazy thing of like wanting to start a network or a coalition, which is A, probably the hardest ones to fund for, but B, it's like you're basically a cat herder. You're basically herding cats when you are a network and coalition leader. But it's like when we see people connect, it hits us. And when we help people connect, it's what gives us life, and it's what gives us the vision for what we're doing. So there's definitely a slightly unique and slightly crazy DNA with setting up coalitions and networks. So what we're going to do is we're going to hand out some post-it notes, because you know what, if anybody's done anything with non-profits and charities, if you don't have a post-it note and a whiteboard, then really it's like, what are you? So we are completely PowerPoint free. We are completely PowerPoint free on this session, and we are going old school post-its and paper, okay? So what I'd like you to do is just literally write 1 or 2 words on there is, you know, what is your hope for this session? Why have you come to this session apart from to see these 4 crazy women talk a lot about networks and coalitions? So maybe you're thinking of starting a network or a coalition, or you have started a network or a coalition, and you're wondering why you started a network or a coalition. So throw down some ideas on your post-its, And then we're going to just have you call out some of the things that you've written down. And what we're going to do afterwards, actually, we're going to stick them all on this board over here, because I think it's always a great reminder when we're like through the middle of a session, kind of like revisiting, okay, this is why people are here. So, anybody written on their post-it note already? Great. Lucy.
I said I love Connect Thailand.
She loves Connect Thailand, which is the Thai coalition, so that's why she's here. She's a member of the Connect Thailand one. Okay, who else? Anybody else written something on their paper now? Come on, don't be shy. Don't be shy. Somebody else written something? Great.
I'm looking to play a more active role in existing coalitions. There's so many already, so want to be a more active part.
We like you. Okay, you can go around and grab some now. Okay, who else? Anybody else? Right. Okay, go for it.
Oh, what did I do? Yeah. Wanting to understand the power of coalition and working together to make movement and change.
Go for it. Who's got one?
Develop relationships and understand where we fit in, support local efforts.
I've got one. Want to see how we can grow impact through coalitions and alliances.
How do you know when a coalition or network is successful and working well?
Learning to herd the cats better and get more grassroots organizations involved in the leadership.
How to introduce the topic of anti-trafficking to other existing community development networks.
I want to know how to make people stay in a coalition.
How do we make coalitions more known?
How do we make coalitions more known? What you all need to do, you need to hashtag this as much as you can. The power of coalition.
Want to know how to create a local network.
Would you say? So like unified approach for coalitions, challenges and way forward.
Connections across countries, especially Southeast Asia, partnerships and best practices.
Want to know can and how it works.
Ways to minimize NGOs' worry about joining together with others, so loss of identity or loss of, or jealousy, loss of funding, that kind of thing.
I've got another one. Stay connected and empowered. Hashtag the power of coalitions.
Got camaraderie and movement.
I'm here to learn about coalition, but more specifically for India region and see how I can contribute.
Further development of the Asia Freedom Network. Hashtag collaboration for the collective.
Expand the anti-trafficking ecosystem.
If you want to walk fast, walk along. If you want to walk long, walk together.
So I need resources, and I'm looking to the coalitions and networks to get them.
I want to connect to leaders who run a coalition to our partners across the world.
I want to learn how survivors can be included or claim space in the network or coalition.
Fab. Okay, so we've got about 50-ish minutes, 45, 50 minutes. Okay, but we are going to grab a table or multiple tables at lunch. So if anybody wants to like continue the conversation at lunch, then we will plan to do that as well. So this is awesome. We've got some great questions and great statements here on why you're all here. And can I just say, like, this just super excites me because there's a lot of great breakout sessions right now. And to have this number of people in a network and coalition one, like, this is amazing because I think 4 or 5 years ago, we would have never have had this many. Like 5 years ago, I did the breakout at ARA in Bangkok, and I think we had like 20 max in the room. So the word is already getting out there that networks and coalitions are the way forward, right? So, so we're going to start with the question of why do we need networks and coalitions? Like, what is the purpose of them? Why do we use our effort in herding cats? I'm sure there's better ways we can spend our time, right? So what I just want to do is just go through like some of the challenges that we face, right? Because if we're going to ask why coalitions and networks, we need to start with what is our rationale, right? What's the problem statement? Why do we even need it? So a couple of years ago, a number of us met with the GLC, the Global Learning Community. If you're not a part of the Global Learning Community, join it. And within the Global Learning Community, there's a network and coalition group. And so within this network and coalition group, we started having a lot of conversations around how can we elevate this conversation? How can we help empower networks and coalitions to write proposals that donors will read and see both a research foundation and an evidence-based practice for why to fund networks and coalitions? So I think we all agree that this movement needs inter-organizational and multi-sector collaboration at every level. Local, we need national, we need regional, we need global, right? We all kind of have come around that. Now, collaboration isn't something that is just a cup of coffee and something that just happens. Collaboration actually requires strategically minded leaders who have the vision, the skills, and the bandwidth to facilitate collective development. And having collaborative responses. So just as I said at the beginning, you know, what gives us like that, like, wow, this is fab, is when we see people connect, or when we are part of connecting people. That's what really like feeds our souls. So there's something different around somebody who needs and desires to lead a coalition than somebody who is going to lead a project. And that's the beauty of this diverse table that we're all around. But we know that on the ground there is still a lack of coordination between stakeholders working to address the same issue. And while partnerships are happening, most of them are not so strategic or informed. A lot of them are limited. Quite often it's like, oh, I have this situation, so I'm going to partner with you because I need a referral for that case, or I have this that I need to learn, so I'm actually going to just partner with you for this because I need to learn this. But it's very rare that we're actually intentional about that, because our normal work, what is in the middle of our log frames and our deliverables that we have to deliver, often don't center on collaboration. So there's often a desire for collaboration, but often not the time for it. And so NGOs and others are often then focused on their own organization. Unfortunately, some are focused on their own egos and very sort of competitive in terms of the funding space. And so they think that if they join a broader network or coalition, it might kind of like reduce their presence in the space, or even worse, may reduce their funding in the space. And so I think that it's really important, if we look at this, that a lack of these opportunities of being a part of networks and coalitions can also result in low professional capacity in terms of organizations being a part of kind of like their own sort of like echo chamber. It's that when you're only focused on your own organization and your own programs, and you're not looking outside at what's the bigger picture, what's happening. Like we heard from Mina this morning, a much bigger picture of what's happening in the movement, right? And in Asia in total. So I think that for organizations, in order for them to broaden their horizons, in order for them to be proactive and new areas to work in the future, again, coalitions and networks are often where the center point happens in a nation or a region or globally in terms of capacity building, in terms of access to resources, in terms of intentional partnership development, and assessment of what is needed. So we know a lot of the problems. What else are some of the possible and potential impacts of coalitions? What else do they offer? So we have seen coalitions develop national referral mechanisms. Coalitions develop case management processes, collective case management, developing a trust-based culture so that you have an environment to actually call out harmful practices as well as promote promising practices. Mapping and tracking resources. One of the pieces up here earlier was how do we track and map something about resources. Yeah, coalitions are the ones who are having the bigger picture of what's happening in their area, whether that's thematic or geographic. And so mapping and tracking resources and then understanding what are the gaps and what are the overlaps are critical for the movement. Advocacy. Advocacy, especially in Asia, can be a huge challenge for single organizations, especially if it goes against government frameworks and practices. And so advocacy on a scale where you're involving coalitions and networks gives greater protection and a greater voice. It's when we look at educating on trends and responses, again, beyond our own organizations, there's a greater sustainability of information because organizations hold a certain amount of data and information, but when you've got a network or coalition, it's not dependent on just a single organization. You're holding much more of a collective institutional history. And you're sharing it. You're not just taking that knowledge and having it just for your own organization, but you're sharing it beyond your organization. And so often with networks, there's an intention on focusing on common ground. And when you focus on the common ground, it brings a certain amount of neutrality to the environment. And one of the things that actually brings about is addressing conflict and minimizing conflict within a particular, again, geographical or thematic area. And we're going to be looking at some case studies in a minute, but it's really interesting how often networks and coalitions have been the instigators of mitigating conflicts within organizations, among organizations, and actually between sectors. So I know that Chabdai did a lot of conflict mitigation between the government sector and the NGO sector, where there had been a lot of tension for a long time. So there's a few ideas there for you to kind of like start us off. Now, before we go into each of these fabulous women sharing what their experiences are of running networks and coalitions. Are there any kind of burning questions before we sort of like go into our next bit? Or comments? No? Okay, that's good. All right, so I am going to hand over to Dalaina first. Off you go, my love. You want to go from there or from here? Can you see? Yeah, I think it's better standing up.
Everything she said. So, well, I think the reason we decided that we would go, who will go first, second, and third, is because we are at a very early stage, the early stages of the coalition or network. And that would mean either 1 year or more. And I think it takes about 2-3 years sometimes to get to that place where, okay, I know what's really happening. So we are still at a stage 1 year on for Connect Thailand where we're just like, okay, are we even doing anything? But for Connect Thailand, I think some of the needs that we addressed when we first thought, okay, we need a coalition, we need a network, a few things. One was that there were a lot of small groups. You know, Thailand, we have loads of NGOs, so we had loads of small groups. But the groups weren't really coming together simply because when you're part of an NGO, you're just doing your work, and then you're looking for collaborative partners that has synergies to whatever you are doing, right? The causes and programs that you are aligned with. But sometimes the need is wider. We need to kind of cast a wider net in order to be able to assess our situation better, or even get resources, new resources, or wider resources that will actually help solve our problem or need. So that was happening throughout Thailand, and then we had a lot of issues. Talking to a few friends from NGOs in Thailand, we realized, oh my goodness, I think we need something that's connecting us from north to south and in between. So that's how Connect Thailand was birthed, and we kind of did it differently. I came up with, I had an idea for a network, and we kind of formulated it within our organization. Then we thought, what would be a better idea is if we just brought organizations together and start the coalition as a coalition. So we have 5 core team members who are part of other key organizations that work well throughout Thailand as well. So some of the things that I think is hard for us, a challenge as you're starting a coalition, is just because we are all strong leaders, and these are just practical challenges. We are all strong leaders, and we are all strong organizations doing our work well within our sphere of influence. Ideas, we all have lots of ideas, right? We loads of ideas, and then streamlining that and coming to an agreement about what really is the focus of a network is very important, I think, because I think that's where we can go wrong in the beginning stages, not having enough structures in place before we start jumping into solving problems and providing greater measures and capacity for the wider network. So within, I think one thing that I would say would, for us, a challenge that we are trying to still solve is, what is our focus? One thing that we've noticed was forming the collaboration between NGOs and government organizations has been a great strength. So we've had a couple of forums, and those forums, of course, they were identified through the current trends. What is it that we need? One was forced criminality, and another one was related to sexual exploitation that led to trafficking. And we noticed that a lot of smaller organizations were doing amazing work in Thailand, but not really connected with the government, so not really receiving feedback and resources that they could receive, and vice versa, right? So the government organizations were really thankful that they could meet lots more organizations on the ground that they could actually go to when they had resources, or they needed help, or they needed resources. So we realized that, oh, that's actually something that's a gap. So what is the gap is something that we are still identifying and wanting to really look at better. And then when we look at the Asia Freedom Network, the strategy is a little different. We have country managers that we are identifying. So I guess depending on the kind of network and how wide the network is going to be, the strategy should be different, right? So the country managers then, for Asia Freedom Network, form the voices on the ground for us, for when we are looking at the bigger picture on what the network needs. The needs assessment will come from the country managers, who will then help manage each country through networks that are in the country and organizational leaders that are in the country. So we are still in the midst of recruiting more country leaders, so if you're interested, please come and see me. Yeah, so identifying the needs and gaps is a huge part, especially specific vulnerabilities and gaps, because there are lots of gaps, right? So a network does not have to fill all the gaps. I think the network can provide resources for organization to fill the gaps, but the network can have a wider eye on, oh, I see a bigger gap here, and I see resources that other organizations may not see when we are part of an NGO. So I think that's something that I've learned over the, oh, I'm speaking too fast. Oh, sorry for online speaking. My husband's not here to tell me. He wants me all the time. That's what happens when you get excited. So, yeah, so identifying, needs assessment is important. Identifying the gaps are important, but identifying the gaps based on priorities of vulnerabilities and need is important for a network. And according to geographical areas, for example, for Asia Freedom Network and Connect Thailand, it's very different, right? What we need in the north of Thailand is very different from what we need in the south. So as a network, what we do and some of the challenges is how can we effectively provide resources that actually can be used across borders, cross-sector, but also across NGOs, and cultural context is very important as well. What's up in the north within a country is very different from other parts. So a network can step in to provide research, evidence-based research, as well as cultural context on how the gaps can be met by NGOs, and we can be the bridging, the bridge for how we execute our programs or whatever it is that we're doing. And I think one thing that's important that I've noticed is just talking to NGOs, talking to NGO leaders, and we realize that the need of the NGO, the need of the cause within, like if it's an anti-trafficking sector, there's a need for the anti-trafficking sector within Thailand or within Asia. But then the need of NGOs could be very different. And then we streamline it even more. The need of the NGO leaders are very different as well. So is there a space for a network to be able to provide for that as well in the long run? Because we notice that resources are usually for the programs, for the NGOs, and sometimes for the cause. But are there enough resources out there for NGO leaders? Are there enough resources out there for government organizations? Are there enough resources out there for the front lines? I mean that as individuals. And I don't think there is enough of that out there. So people are burning out and dropping out all over the place. And then the next one comes in, and then we are like, let's go. And then 5 years down the line, it's the same thing that happens. So how do we change that? Because you walk along with so much of experience, and then you're like, and someone else comes on and you have to start all over again in some sense. So how do we provide for that within a network was something that was very important. And then redefining capacity building. What does capacity building even mean, right? Because we always take it back to funding, and I think a lot of times funding is not the problem. We take it back to networking, and a lot of times networking is not the problem. So can a network actually be an independent entity that spends time and focuses on what capacity building really is and what is needed for each region, each country, and each sector within the anti-trafficking course? I think I'll stop there before I take everybody's time.
I think Helen covered a lot of that, similar things, because I think, the needs are often really similar, and, as you start engaging in solutions, they often look similar. So when Dark Bali's beginning, this was around 2015, so we're nearly 10 years now, one of the big things that I saw working in a little organization right up the road here that was all Indonesian was that there was a huge difference in power and voice between the grassroots level and the people on the top. And there was very little conversations in between. And it bothered me because I was looking at this going, man, my colleagues are the people that actually know the most about this. They're the ones that are working in, direct services. They know the trends as they're happening, but there's no bridge between them and the people that are actually making decisions. And there's some cultural elements at play as well in Indonesia with that, but really wanting to see how can we get their voices amplified? So that was kind of the first thing. How can we amplify voices? And the idea was a collective, right? If you have a bunch of small voices together, well, eventually you can get real loud. And so that was kind of the thought. We can't get listened to as individuals, but maybe if we're all together, there's actually some power. And we did see that. In the very beginning of Dark Bali, like, nobody from social services would pay attention to us. Law enforcement wasn't interested. Like, there's just nothing. But we stuck at it, and we kept growing. And as we grew, specifically the group in Bali, there's groups all over the country, but the group in Bali, all of a sudden we had the Witness Protection Program reaching out and saying, hey, we'd actually like to work through your network to connect with survivors. So, just realizing, oh yeah, that actually works. So that was probably the first big reason we felt like, okay, there's a need for coalition. The second is resources. There's a lot of Indonesian folks in here, and they will tell you too, sometimes we look around, we're like, y'all have so much stuff, and we have so little. So little is translated into Indonesian, and even the anti-trafficking movement in Indonesia has been very isolated for the last 20 years. So in a lot of ways, we're going, oh, that's interesting. We've never seen that before. And then there's things happening in Indonesia that I don't think anybody else is doing either. So, really wanting to even see information flowing both ways. But as far as resourcing goes, how can we get more resources to more people, and how do we do it in a way that's very cost effective? And so it's really kind of like ROI, return on investment, right? Like if you do a training as an organization that has a certain cost and, requires a trainer and the curriculum, but if you go through a coalition, I can do the same training and hit 10 organizations for the same price. It's just efficient, especially in a system where there's so few resources. So that was another big part. And then lastly, when I was working in the little org 10 years ago, I was kind of heartbroken at how high the burnout rate was, because there was so little care given to the caregivers, and it wasn't the fault of the NGO. There was just not resources for people, and there wasn't even an understanding of secondary trauma and things like that. And I remember one of the very first trainings we did, you were there, Tasya, and we did a session on vicarious trauma or secondary trauma, and for most of the people in the room, nobody had ever even heard of this before. And I remember, because it was one of those moments for me that I was like, oh, I'm doing the right thing. This is where I'm supposed to be. Because one of our coalition members got a mic and he said, I thought it was just me. I thought I was doing a bad job. I'm not the only one. And we all burst into tears. You remember? We were all like bawling because we all felt that way. We all felt like we were screwing up. We were not doing a good job. But in reality, we were just able to acknowledge this is really hard work. And so from that, one of the things that we took from that was the need to care for the caregivers, because there's often not a lot of that. And so one of our big pushes is we're not worried about the anti-trafficking work in Indonesia. The organizations in our networks take care of that. We take care of them. And so we really prioritize like self-care, organizational development, things like that. And I mean, I could tell you 1,000 things I would love to do, making sure that people are okay. And it's a little weird to dehumanize it, so, you know, hear me out. But just pulling the people out of it, which I know you can't do, but just thinking in terms of strategy. If I have 100 leaders that don't burn out as fast, maybe they get 5 extra years in the movement, think about how much power that is. 5 extra years by 100 people in the network to not burn out is an incredible push to the movement. And so I think even just thinking in terms of how do we make this movement grow with such little resources? Our people are our resources. I think Helen is right. Okay, funding, yeah, obviously we need funding. But the people are our resources. And if we can keep them around longer and make sure that they stay healthy, we're not using them, you know, using and going through them, training on vicarious trauma, training on staff care, encouraging people to, I've encouraged people to quit from the podium a few times. Like, I'm kind of known for that. I'm just like, look, no, you're a human being. And if this isn't working for you, step down, step aside. There are other people, we got your back. We got your back. We will absorb this for you. And so I think there's a real beauty in a coalition where there's trust to make sure that nobody feels like the whole world rests on their shoulders anymore, because I think we often feel that way. And so I think for me, one of the major roles of a network or a coalition is taking care of your people. And so, yeah, that's my big thing.
Okay, well, I did not start the network that I was leading. I was there when it first started, but I was not part of the leadership or anything. So when I came on board, it was about 3 years later, and we were at a situation where we had 3 people who were leading it, and they were all dropping like flies. They'd been working too hard trying to connect with everyone and then connect everyone to everyone else. When I came on board, it was time for a different stage of the network, to develop it and to start to develop some infrastructure and to start to create some interconnectivity, so it wasn't just based on people having relationships with one another, but really relying on the leaders of the network to get all the answers they wanted, but to actually help create something that enabled people to go to each other. It was a very different stage. So when the network first formed, the felt need was about not feeling alone. Having a conference was the answer, like coming together, but then how do you not feel alone in between conferences? How do you not feel alone for the rest of the year? So that's where we started building some infrastructure to help people to connect to one another. And I think that's something that needs to happen as a network grows, is you kind of need to build a skeleton for it to hang on. Light, you want to keep it light, but you need some sort of infrastructure to help it to hang together. Because if you imagined your body without a skeleton, it's just all going to fall limp, isn't it? And it's the same with the network. As it gets bigger, you need to add infrastructure to help to do that. So we created some things like some platforms where people could put their tools on, or their resources on, and share them. We also had the dynamic in our network that it involved 40 different countries, which meant a whole lot of different languages. So sharing resources, people would want resources from one place but then need to have it translated. So having a platform where people could share information was really helpful. Another thing that is really helpful is to provide some kind of mechanism where people can communicate with one another. Otherwise, you're always going to have the situation of whoever other point people, everyone's going to ring them and go, do you know someone that can do this? Whereas you kind of want to have a way that you can do that. People can do that for themselves. So we did that on the platform, but we also did a very simple thing of having a Facebook group that was secret, so people couldn't just join it. You know, when they'd been vetted by the network, they could join it, and then people could just communicate with one another, and that was really important. We were also at the stage where we were formalising as a network, so we were wanting to start doing advocacy and everything, and we needed to be a legal entity. Helen was on our board at that time, and that's when we started putting a bit more formal things in place. But then once you've got an organisation to run, that's a whole lot of other work as well. I would hold to having an organisation lightly if you don't need to as a network, or if you can have a secretariat or something like that. That could be a better way to do that. But the felt needs of networks change over time. Networks actually mature over time. So what was the felt need when EFN started was not the felt need a few years later. And I think that's something as a network is you've got to think about what's the felt need now, because really that's what people get together around. Like, what's the felt need at the room? So when EFN started, it was like people just wanted to know that there were others out there, like knowing who's out there, and that's where like speed networking exercises like we did yesterday come in really handy, because everybody wants to know everyone. But then it becomes other things, like people need to mature their organisations. They want to know about the latest trends that are out there that are bigger than themselves. And that's what we felt what we were hearing, because we would often ask our members, you know, what is it that you need right now? Or what are the problems that you're trying to solve right now? And we would try and speak into those places. I guess from our experience, we had a time where we went from, you know, conference to start doing different things in between conferences. And actually COVID really helped us with that because suddenly everybody knew how to get online and do webinars and things, which never happened before. We had tried it and people were just like, I don't know how to do a webinar, I don't know how to join one, so it was hard to get any traction. So sometimes the times just change and you're able to leverage how the times are changing. But, you know, once COVID hit, it came to Italy. One of our members had experienced it, and you know, everyone was in that stage of wondering what's going to happen. And so we just did a call and said, look, whoever wants to talk about this and how it might impact their work, let's talk about it. And I think that was sort of, we organised the call for 2 weeks later, and once the call happened, everyone was in lockdown. So it all happened very quickly. So we were able to actually talk through, and the felt need of the community was, well, what do we do with our ministries now? We used to do street outreach. We're not allowed out of our houses now. So how do we reach those women? So you had like a whole membership who were worried about how do we reach these women, what's happening to them now that we can't go and visit them on the streets. So we actually all worked together for weeks, and we would just meet every week and we would talk about how do we reach people online. How do we do that, and how do we do it from our homes? Like, how do we set up our computer so that if we're calling someone, an adult, maybe because people were looking on adult websites and calling the numbers, that was their way of just cold calling, but then you didn't know if it was a trafficker that was on the other end of the phone, or was it someone with lived experience, what was happening. And then you're doing this from your own home, from your own computer, so how do you stay safe doing that? And that was a big thing at that time. So we had people come in and talk to them how to set up firewalls and how to set up their security actually on their computers, which took a lot of work because they were not technical people. But we did that, and that was the felt need at the time, and worked through that. And actually, I think as a network, COVID was actually really good for us because it turned us from a network that went from conference to a network that did loads of things in between and had lots of discussions and support. And then after COVID, that sort of waned off a bit. But then we had the Ukraine war in Europe, and that was another time where there was a whole lot of felt need. But it was also a time that showed the power of what a network can do. So the war was announced on a Thursday. By the Sunday, or by Monday, we had brochures going out on the borders of 5 different countries, just because everyone was working together. So the people that were responding and on the borders, talking to people that were crossing borders, they had no time to develop brochures. They were just in their cars and going there. But we, like I was in Portugal, so I was far away from it, we were all developing brochures and getting them all translated and getting numbers and websites set up so that when they were at the border they had something to give. And actually, because we had that within 5 days, governments took another 2 weeks to respond. And the international NGO community, they came along about another month later, and the UN about a month later as well. So we were actually the first ones there, and I think that's the power of a network, is that we can just mobilise so quickly if we want to, because we all knew one another. We can just ring up and go, can you do this? And we had the infrastructure to do it, because we all knew how to communicate with one another. There were places where we could look for help. And that was just amazing. And in fact, some of the big NGOs came and saw, they sent their teams to the ground to see what was happening, and everywhere they were going, they were finding our brochures. So they ended up ringing us up and going, can you train all of our staff that are coming in to know what to do and to understand what the trafficking situation is and what's actually happening? And then aside from that, we had a weekly meeting of anyone that was working on Ukraine, and we would just come together and we would share data. What are you seeing? What are you seeing? What are you seeing? And actually, we worked with Stop the Traffic, and they had their investigators coming in who were listening for material that was getting passed on to the police, so that the information that was coming in and happening on the border and how trafficking was happening and the tactics that were being used were getting spread and shared right around the network, which was really, really good and really, really impactful. So yeah, networks can do amazing, amazing things when we're together, and that's what I personally love about networks, is that when we work together we can do things that are way bigger than ourselves. We can do things that are impacting wars. I think there's lots of research out there now that the human trafficking or the anti-trafficking movement did such a great job on Ukraine, that the amount of trafficking that they were expecting to see didn't happen. And I know that EFM was part of that, so that's really exciting. So thank you.
Okay, so what we're going to do now, the whole idea of this was for us to kind of like give you a background. Yeah, okay, we've got 10 minutes for questions. But then we are going to have lunch, whoever wants to have lunch. So, was to give a background on why we need networks and coalitions. And then I think a lot of people would always say, but what does a network actually look like? What does it actually do? So this is like, this is what networks actually do. And every single one of these networks are vastly different. They're vastly different. But they are also the same in the vision of they see the power of connecting people. they see and they work practically in connecting people. So what we want to do is just open this out to conversation. We've got a few microphones here, and we can also come out and run. Before we run into the Q&A, I'm also going to talk just about a couple of resources, because I don't want us to run out of time and not have the conversation around resources. So Mr. Joe has been an angel and uploaded a load of resources for us. Woohoo! Well done. Thanks, Joe. So on the Hoover app, you'll see that we've put some resources up there. One is the Global Learning Community Coalition Startup Toolkit. So that is basically a toolkit that I pulled together with a few other people over the last few years on step-by-step. What are the questions that you should be asking yourself if you want to start a network or a coalition? And it literally goes from the beginning. Who do you pull together to ask those questions? What kind of structure do you want, or structure do you need? What theme or what geographical area are you going to focus on? What does a mapping look like, and how do you do that? And then how do you start developing practices for your network and coalition? So all of these resources are all open access, and please feel free to use them however you want. The other document that is up there as well is a network and coalition brief, which again was pulled together by these ladies and others who are running networks and coalitions around the world. And it basically, it's a framework for a proposal, because a lot of networks and coalitions say, again, how do I put this into words? How do I show that there is research out there, that there is evidence out there that networks and coalitions are the future? So this looks at problem statements outlining the leads for coalitions and networks. It has evidence from research showing practices and outcomes of coalitions and networks. And then it shows illustrative case stories from coalitions and networks. And so, Dalaina, have you used that?
I have successfully copied and pasted this document and gotten a grant from it, and you should too. So it is literally there to copy and paste. It's open access through the global learning community, but if you aren't a part of the global community, you should be, but you can email me and I'd be happy to get it to you as well. But literally copy and paste it, save yourself some time on your grant proposals.
That's what we want, right? If we're going to multiply networks and coalitions, we need to make it easier. And so some legwork has been done here, so yeah, please use it. There's also a really interesting article, which for copyright we can't put up onto the Hoover app, but for anybody who is interested, I think you can probably access it now. The Stanford Social Innovation Review publication a decade ago published a series on the power of collective impact, and it kind of like takes people through like 5 key areas for having collective impact, social impact in their areas. And one of them is develop a backbone organization to structure this. And so again, that is a really great document to reference. Stanford University were talking about this a decade ago, and the importance of having networks and coalitions. Okay, some questions before we, yeah. I'm gonna, let's just take a few around, and we'll just share.
Thank you everyone that spoke. That was really incredible. I'm quite passionate about coalitions when I didn't know much when I walked in. My question is probably directed to the beautiful comment that Leanne made about what is the felt need. I felt that was very relevant to coalitions, groups, NGOs and teams. And so I guess my question around that is how to identify the felt need. Is that an intuitive discussion? Is that something that works easy in a coalition, or is it something that you have like a framework or a system or a program to actually identify and hone in on what that felt need is?
So I think it's a combination of things. I think We have a team of people that are leading EFN, and we're always watching for what the pulse is. Like, we're all talking and having conversations with different people at different times. So there is, like, you just pick up the pulse of what's going on. We ask lots of questions as well. Every now and again, so maybe every couple of years, we would invite some key people from the network together and run a consultation and just do a check and go, what do you want from this? And we sort of put everything out on the table and go, what do you want? But I think it's a combination of the pulse that you feel, the questions that you go out and ask. I think Leah would say that networks are notoriously bad at answering surveys, so you actually got to do the hard work and ring people and go, what do you think, and just have conversations. But then I think there's also what's happening in the lay of the land at the moment and what's happening in the movement and what are the needs. Like today we heard online scamming, so we would actually look and go, you know, everyone in our network is working on sexual exploitation and there's only a handful working on labour. So, in the EU, there's all these due diligence laws coming up. So we need to be prepared for what's happening in the world and get ready for that. So sometimes we'd start speaking into trends before they were fully happening to prepare people for that. So it was a combination of all of those.
Helen, when you were starting out, you mentioned something that I have observed in some places, and I wanted to find out, what have you done to ensure that there is no competition between the groups that you bring together, and that people are actually learning and working with one another towards like a common goal? So maybe share some of the things that you have done to ensure that the competition is not there.
Yeah, so ensuring no competition, well, that isn't the goal really. It's about what healthy competition looks like in actually bringing people together around a common goal. So I think one of the things that networks and coalitions does is that it brings people around this common goal rather than just focusing on their organization. And the more people understand that common goal and that common vision, then they understand that everybody has a part to play. And so I'll give an example of that. So in Cambodia, in the early days, there were a number of aftercare shelters who were all serving a similar population, and they were all competing for similar grants for this similar population. Well, when I know that we've got a minute left, but you know what? If you don't have to rush off, stay, and then we're going to take some tables at lunch. So if you do need to go in a minute, that's fine. So what we did is when we were developing the national referral mechanism, we said, okay, actually what we need shelters for boys, we need shelters for girls under 10, we need shelters for teenage girls, we need shelters for women, shelters for Vietnamese. And so then the organizations themselves started to see that they have a unique competency. And so some of them actually shifted their entire programs. They were like, oh, well, if they're already doing shelters for girls who are less than 10 years old, and we're doing shelters for girls less than 10 years old, but there's no shelters for women, then we'll change our program and we'll actually start a shelter for women. And so what that starts to do is organizations see the need for each other. And so competition looks different. So yes, are some organizations still going to go for similar grants? They are, but they see the big picture. And I think that that's the difference with the network and coalition, is you're not just seeing your own organization and your own program, but you're realizing that you're part of an ecosystem that is critical to your organization as well as to every single organization in the coalition. And that's where it changes a mindset. Yes, you still have to raise money for your shelter for women or whatever it is, but you're actually realizing, well, that organization is really needed as well, and they still really need their shelter for children. And so it brings a different mindset to what does competition look like, it actually looks like the fact that you're all part of the same ecosystem. And if it's you or them, if it's a me or them, that isn't what an ecosystem is. It's a me and them. So we'll run like another 5 minutes, if everybody's good with that.
I think that the lunch is calling, but the time is for us as well, right? Thank you. I just want to add to Helen to answer your question. Actually, in Cambodia, we are the leading our coalition in Cambodia. I can say that you can see Chap Dai, we have 4 hands. This is a joint hand together. So everyone had to be the same common objective to fighting with human trafficking. But I give the value on 2 points. One is clear communication at the beginning of being the members or involvement of the coalition. Second, regular connection. This is very important key role of the coalition had to run and had to coordinate. My question, sorry to all panelists and not to the room as well. Actually right now, because of the demanding of the fund, because of the demanding of the individual NGOs, that is why many donors, they not considering or supporting the coalition because not proper direction to their donor want to see or their donor want to achieve. It mainly that they don't think that coalition directly implement with the survivor of human trafficking, but the coalition work directly with the member or with the coordination or with the collaboration only. That's why how can we collect the benefit to the donor? So my question, how we ensure, how we can make sure that donors are interested in supporting coalition work? That is very big challenges for coalition, even my coalition in Cambodia as well. Thank you very much.
I think if you see yourself as an advocate for the people in your network, that's really where it is. You know, we've got some great partners that are donors, and I'm often like, you should check these people out. They're doing that thing that you're invested in. And I think you get to know your donors, right? Like what are their priorities? And because I know the organizations in my network, I know what they're doing. And so I see myself as a connector, like a bridge between ourselves and donors. Another thing that we often do, because so much of the funding world is in the West and it's in English, is we provide support for grant making and translation. I was talking to Rachel yesterday. One of our big desires in Dark Bali is to have some sort of a workshop where we can actually teach our organizations how to do basic grant writing, how to do basic because they have never seen one before. And so I think a coalition can be a really unique place where you can provide learning and structure, where you can bridge gaps, where you can kind of translate between what a donor is asking for and helping people understand what does it mean to turn in your report on time, things like that. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there to really support both the donor and then the organizations within your coalition to find each other.
Okay.
I think one thing that's important as well, I think, is because a lot of times, a lot of people don't understand what a network or coalition actually do. So I think it's our responsibility as coalition leaders to educate or explain better what coalition does, because I think donors will buy into it if they know what exactly is happening within a coalition and how much coalition actually support and bring to scale a lot of things that NGOs do, right? Sometimes it just looks like it's operational and here we are here to just govern a few NGOs and watch what we are doing and help them do stuff, but we are actually providing a larger platform, a larger space for scalability and sustainability. So I think framing it and reframing what we do, understanding what we really do, simplify it, and allow donors to actually participate in the big, wider work is very important.
Okay, last question, Sophie. I think, and this is more of a question to, I think, Helen. So I think for me the biggest issue being now being on the funder side, when I've had discussions with people, because I understand what a coalition is, but when I've had discussion with other people, it's exactly what you've said. There's a lack of understanding of what a network is, and for me the main issue, when I hear what people are saying, is the main issue is it feels like in governance, in operation, and in implementation of projects, most networks now resemble organizations. Resemble organizations. So like if I took away the word network out of it, everything else looks like an org. So just playing devil's advocate here. Not that he needs one. Yeah, but
okay.
Like
I'm with you, Soph.
So governance, operation, I'm just saying you take out all those things, and then fundamentally, if someone is looking at it, it looks like it's the same. So I get that we need more framing, but I also feel like networks need to be a little bit better in making a distinction of how different they are from like one organization.
Yeah, okay, happy to take and pass it on as well. So I think there's two things that I would say. I think that for a network can look like an organization, but it could also look like a community group, and it could look like something else as well. But I think that there's a couple of things in terms of being a network that we need to be cognizant of. One is there needs to be some type of governance within it. So in order for there to be some type of governance so that there is accountability and there are avenues for funding, that's kind of a given. Even if you're just a small backbone organization, there does need to be some governance. Otherwise, where is the accountability? And then there is an issue, because if you are not accountable as a network, then there is a reputation risk for all of your members. So if you just like, you start up, you rock up, you do something like very cash, and then, I'm taking money on the side or whatever, then actually there's a reputational risk for every organization that is a part of that network. Because as an organization joins a network, they are taking a step of trust. And that is huge. And so as a network and a coalition leader, like I take that really seriously, the responsibility of each of those organizations in the network, because we go to bat for those organizations. Like we've defended organizations in front of the government in Cambodia. And I know that each of you have gone to bat for organizations as well. So there has to be some aspect of governance that yes, then it does look like an organization in that way, but the focus is very different, because the focus is centralized into what this common ground is for all of the people who are in it. And so it looks very different in terms of it's far less about you and your structure in that terms, and it's about the community that you're representing. So it's just like community organizing in that way, that you're representing that community. And when something goes down in that community, it goes down on you as well. When something is good on that community, then you can represent the whole community as well. But there does need to be a governance piece to all of this, and a responsibility for us as network leaders of everybody who joins. Does that make sense? Okay, so thank you for hanging in another 10 minutes. I think what we'll do is we'll take a table each at lunch. Yeah? So we'll just grab a table each at lunch and come join us if you want to. Thank you very much. Don't forget, power of the coalitions is the future of the movement.